Hi there, David Taylor or Mr Pelargonium, back with another video for the Pelargonium and Geranium Society. Now today I'm going to talk all about standards, right from the basics of taking cuttings for them, right through to growing them quite big. You may need a bit of room for them, of course, if you're going to squeeze them into a glass house. So let's get going and have a look. Well, hello there, welcome back to the channel, and it's good to see you again. I'm filming this on the very last day of July, and it's another very dull, cool, wet morning. We seem to be breaking all kinds of records this year for coolness and wetness, unlike last July when we were all being fried alive. Good for growing though, it should be said. Now today I'm talking all about standards. I've done quite a few videos over the last couple of weeks that I'm going to sort of insert through this one. Right, now everybody sort of generally knows that I like to grow a standard. Primarily, I don't know what it is, I don't know whether it's just the challenge of being able to grow a standard pelargonium, whether it be the zonals or regals or other types of plant, uniques, whatever type of plant it may be in terms of pelargoniums. I've probably grown a standard of it over the years, but I mean, I've got standards here. This is a standard that I'm developing of Gosbrook Susanna. It's a relatively young standard. So the first obvious consideration is that to grow a standard of any sort of decent size is going to take a little bit of time. That's one thing you're going to need. So you're going to need to be able to get them through the winter. That's one of the first considerations. You're going to need to be doing a fair number of repots over the years for them. And realistically, I mean, you can keep realistically, you can keep any pelargonium for as long as you want, realistically, if you keep repotting it and sort of cutting it back each year and growing it on, it'll keep going for years. But standards, you know, sort of lend themselves to be grown for a good number of years, because to get to a size where you're going to get a really nice head on them is going to take several years anyway, realistically. But the head is just starting to develop. You can possibly see that there. But that's, you know, to sort of say get to an exhibition standard, which I often want to grow for. I'm not going to shy away from that. But I don't only grow them for exhibition. It will take probably 3 years to get a pretty decent sized plant to use for exhibition. Now, this Gosbrook Susanna is a relatively fast growing dwarf, and sort of fast growing dwarfs are on the zonal side certainly one of the best types to go for, because you're going to get a main stem relatively quickly. I have got another younger standard over there, and I'll get it. This is a Sammy Browham, and this is actually really quite young. There's no head on it yet. This is just a cutting from last year, and this is already as tall as that Gosbrook Susanna. But this is a 13-month-old cutting, 1st of July last year, so it's exactly 13 months old. But that's put on really good length over the time, over this last year. You can see there, hopefully you can see that. I should be able to home in, hopefully. That's just splitting there, but I will take that side shoot out. There's other side shoots there coming. Certainly with bicolours and tricolours, if you're growing them, you may get the odd ghost shoot, and I've got a ghost shoot in there, and I certainly want to get those out, because ghost shoots take a lot of energy away from the main plant. A ghost shoot in bicolour and tricolour terms is a leaf that's pure white, and you need to lose those. Now, I should be said that I've actually got a Sammy Brown just down here that I potted up yesterday and I did film. So I think it's probably going to be a good idea to pop that video in now. Right, okay, so we have got a Sammy Browham here. This is grown on fairly well. It's been pulled in quite nicely. It's nice, relatively tight to the stake, as can be seen here. The head is developing well. It's actually developing quite a bulbous head. Now, the first thing, we're going to put this on. The first thing I'm actually going to do, we've got a couple of blooms that are just beginning to break out, and I'm going to take those off. But this is growing quite nice and tight to the head, to the stake rather. As I say, it's nicely trained. So we'll just take the label out. It's going to be fairly straightforward, this, not going to take too long at all. Right, so this is in a 5-inch pot, and it's going up to, basically it's a 7-inch clay pot. So it's a slight over potting really in this case, because I'm wanting this plant to really grow on. Now it's really filled, this pot. This was only potted back in May, I think. Yeah, the very end of May, 30th of May. So strangely, it's the 30th of July. I'm filming this part today. So it's exactly 2 months. Just take off the access. I just like to loosen the base. It's fairly dry. I like to pot up just when they're a little bit dry. Now here's my 7-inch pot. I've got my compost here ready. It's fairly damp. So I'm just going to dump that in. As always with a standard, I want the top line of this existing root ball to sort of basically come to the top of the pot that I'm actually going to put it into. I don't want any sort of backfilling really, because it's all about the nice stem length that I've got there. And there we go, that's sort of ready to go in. I'm going to just sort of, yeah, that's fine. That'll do by the time I've tamped down. That'll be bang on. So I'm just sort of more or less lining it up. Once I've got the compost in, we'll probably push this stake down a little bit. I'm not going to want to push it down a great deal, because it's actually more or less the right height for that head anyway, which I've already got developing. So there's probably over time I'll need to replace that with a slightly taller stake and a slightly thicker stake as well. So I'm just going to backfill that now. Now, in terms of the shows, we allow clay pots as standards because there's a realisation, of course, that that standards are top heavy. So we allow a clay pot. If you keep turning it around, you can see how level it is. That's about bang on, which is absolutely perfect. And I've got that level about bang flush with the existing level of that root ball, which is what you want really here for a standard, because I'm wanting to keep this exposed rootstock, you know, nice and long. Here we are, that's fine. Now, the one thing, as I've said, I'm going to do, I'm just going to push down the stake into this new compost. It can go down 1 inch or 2, or about 3 centimetres, say, just to get that stake going into the compost, just so that it holds nicely. That'll do for now. I've pushed it down about probably 3 centimetres. Yeah, that's fine for now. I don't want to go any further. It's there, the tip of the stake, you can hopefully see it is there. That head's there, that's fine, that's forming nicely. Certainly at some point I will almost certainly need to put a new stake in there, but it's fine for now. Right, now a plant that does need a little bit of action is this standard of Chelsea Gem. We may need to remove some leaves in order to get the stick in. So that's the next thing for me, to get a stick in this, because I've resisted so far. Well, that's not resisted, I've not needed to have it. I'm probably going to need to take that one off as well. Let's have a look then. I'm going to get this, it needs to be stood up a little bit, and it needs to be bored in to straighten it up. I'm probably almost certainly going to need to lose that. That is a good leaf, but I want to get the stake in there, and that's going to need to go right up against where that leaf was. So that's why I need to remove it. It's the only time I'll potentially need to do that. Right, okay, this stick's fine. It's going to launch up about 6 inches above the standard itself. And by the time that it grows up above this, you'll need to put a bigger stake in. This is the initial stake. It needs to be nice and straight because this is basically where your stakes are going to be for the rest of the life of the plant. So just looking down, just prodding it in, just give it a wobble. Look from that angle, maybe push it down that way a bit more, looking at it all the way round as you continue to push down. Right, so let's start to tie this in. Right, so the first one is just literally a steady one to pull this against the what we call the closest point to the stake. So in this point, in this case, it's there. I'm not doing these very tight at all in this case. You want to give it a bit of expansion space, but I know that this isn't going to be used for a monumentally long time, this stake. So I just want to pull that in against there. So let's put this second one in then down here. So I'm doing this fairly tight. The good thing with horticultural string is that it generally stays where you put it. But that's pulled that one in. This stem here is butt right up against it, but this is just loose. It's just loosely holding it in place. There's plenty of growth space in there. That one's got growth space obviously inside, so it's not going to get too much of a jolt. So the rest of it now is pulling this one across, a loose one on there, just to hold it in place really. So we're going to need one, I think, here. So I can begin to pull that across. So what I'm going to do there, this has got too loose, so I put that up to there. That's fine. All right, so there we are. I'm pulling that in. That's gone up quite tight now, that's fine. And there we are. See, so we had a tight butt there. You've got another tightish butt up here. Now the one thing you don't want to do is go pulling it about too much so that you snap the stem. I have done that on the odd occasion, but I'm quite happy with what's going on here. That's butt up tight. This part of the stem here is butt up tight against the stake. And I pulled that in tight as well. That was a little bit bent out, as was this part. But by the time this gets quite tall, you know, it will look straight for all intents and purposes. Yeah, so there we are. That's another Sammy Brown. In fact, I took this cutting from it last year from that plant. It's a cutting from that plant. It's almost certainly a side shoot. So you let the side shoots grow out. Now, the first thing to consider, of course, is that when you've got a standard that's growing from a young point, and I've got another example here. This is a Frank Headley. This is sort of growing on and it's very young. I've only got hold of this year. I got this in a garden centre, actually. Only take the leaves off, like we've got one there that's just beginning to sort of die back. So as soon as they begin to die back, obviously you can take them off. Because this one has got no head, it needs all these side leaves to continue to grow on the main stem in order just to support it and grow it on. Right, so we can see here, I mean, you could argue, you see, this side shoot could form the start of a head. but I still want this to grow on a bit to get a little bit of height. I'm going to take, the first thing I'm going to do is take that bloom off. I think I've already touched on in some of the other videos that you need to sacrifice bloom initially in the early stages of the development of the standard, because you want all of its efforts to go into producing the length of stem. But this side shoot here I'm going to take out. It's just beginning to really develop. You don't need to worry about it too much in terms of, starting to develop, because you need to be able to get enough of it in order to be able to cut it off. But there's enough of that there now. There we are. Let's just snip that off. And side shoot removal is obviously important. So there we are, that's just taken that side shoot out. Now, if possible, you realistically need to choose plants that are relatively short jointed, primarily because you want a head to develop relatively tightly. Now you will be able to sort of obviously cut back now and again to be able to sort of gradually over a number of years tighten the head. Now the majority of dwarf zonals are of course relatively short jointed, that's their nature to grow like that. But I mean, this is just giving an example that growing longer jointed sort of say basic zonals is a little bit of a challenge, because primarily those heads are going to take a good number of years to keep chomping back to be able to provide a relatively tight network of head to be able to sort of look anything half decent. Now the thing you can do of course is grow what we call multi-stem standards, and I'm going to just show you some of the plants now that I've got outside. And probably one of the ones that I've spoken a great deal about over time is my Adenzo Tintomara. It's a Swedish variety, the Adenzo group of plants. But I got hold of one of these, this Tintomara, a few years ago, and I've grown this on as a multi-stem standard. Now, growing as a multi-stem does give you some options to really grow something sort of big and wide, right from top to bottom. You're going to have a good number of stems growing through that all need to be tied in, of course, otherwise you may get to a situation where they're going to split off. But the Adenzo Tintomara here is a really lovely plant, and that's grown on brilliantly. It does need to be trimmed back relatively hard in the winter, primarily just in order to fit it back in my glass house. Now I've got some others here. This is another multi-stem standard. This is a Steve Pollard seedling. He's the PAG's chairman, does quite a bit of breeding of zonals and stellas. That's one of his. We've got another one of his unnamed seedlings here. You can see this plant. This is unnamed. I put this one in the show. I've taken a lot of bloom off. All of this rain we've had in July has wrecked the blooms, so I've got rid of a lot of blooms. There's my big Phyllis, which has done very well this year. That's grown on. Plus a few others. There's Edward's Finn, is a Stella there. There's also my Spitfire, the cactus flowered variety, and also Candy Dancer, which is a scented leaf variety that I've grown on as a standard as well. So there's a few of mine that have grown outside, including the multi-stem ones.